Good morning, everybody. Well, actually, it might be afternoon where you are, but it's this morning here. Right, are you ready to listen to our next chapter of George's Marvellous Medicine? Right, Grandma is sticking out the top of the roof of their house now, the Cranky's house, and Mr. Cranky has come home and is very excited about the possibilities of having giant animals. Right, the next chapter is called A Crane for Grandma. Grandma, from high up on the rooftop, could see everything that was going on, and she still didn't like what she saw. She wanted to be the centre of attention, and nobody was taking the slightest notice of her. George and Mr. Cranky were running around and getting excited about the enormous animals. Mrs. Cranky was washing up in the kitchen, and Grandma was all alone on the rooftop. "Hey, you!" she yelled. "George, get me a cup of tea this minute, you idle little beast." "Don't listen to the old goat," Mr. Cranky said. "She's stuck where she is, and it's a good thing too." "But we can't leave her up there, Dad," George said. "What if it rains?" "George!" Grandma yelled. "Oh, you horrible little boy! You disgusting little worm! Fetch me a cup of tea at once! And a slice of currant cake!" "We'll have to get her down, Dad," George said. "She won't give us any peace if we don't." Mrs. Cranky came outside and she agreed with George. "She's my own mother," she said. "She's a pain in the neck," said Mr. Cranky. "I don't care," said Mrs. Cranky. "I'm not leaving my own mother sticking up through the roof for the rest of her life." So in the end, Mr. Cranky telephoned the crane company and asked them to send their biggest crane out to the house at once. I'm going to show you the picture that's there. There you go. Look how long and thin she is. She's as tall as the crane. The crane arrived 1 hour later. It was on wheels and there were 2 men inside it. The crane men climbed up onto the roof and put ropes under Grandma's arms. Then she was lifted right up through the roof. In a way, the medicine had done Grandma good. It had not made her any less grumpy or any less bad-tempered, but it seemed to have cured all her aches and pains. And she was suddenly as frisky as a ferret. That means very active. As soon as the crane had lowered her to the ground, she ran over to George's huge pony, Jack Frost, and jumped onto its back. This ancient old woman, who was now as tall as a house, then galloped around the farm on the gigantic pony, jumping over trees and sheds and shouting, "Out of my way! Clear the back decks! Stand back all!" Okay. But because Grandma was now much too tall to get back into the house, she had to sleep that night in the hay barn with the mice and the rats. The next chapter is called Mr. Cranky's Great Idea. The next day, George's dad came down to breakfast in a state of great excitement than he'd ever been before. "I've been awake all night thinking about it," he cried. "About what, Dad?" Jules asked him. "Well, about your marvellous medicine, of course. We can't stop now, my boy. We must start making more of it, all at once. More and more and more." The giant saucepan had been completely emptied the day before because there had been so many sheep and pigs and cows and bullocks to be dosed. "But why do we need more, Dad?" George asked. "We've done all our own animals and we've made Grandma feel as frisky as a ferret, even though she does have to sleep in the barn." "My dear boy," cried Mr. Cranky, We need barrels and barrels of it, tons and tons. Then we'll sell it to every farmer in the world, so that all of them can have giant animals. We will build a marvellous medicine factory and sell the stuff in bottles at £5 a time. We will become rich and you will become famous. But wait a minute, Dad, George said. There is no waiting, cried Mr. Cranky, working himself up so much that he put butter in his coffee and milk on his toast. You don't understand what this tremendous invention of yours is going to do to the world. Nobody will ever go hungry again. Why won't they? Asked George. Well, because one giant cow will give 50 buckets of milk a day, cried Mr. Cranky, waving his arms. One giant chicken will make 100 fried chicken dinners, and one giant pig will give you 1,000 pork chops. It's tremendous, my dear boy. It's fantastic. It will change the world. But wait a minute, Dad, George said. Don't keep saying wait a minute, shouted Mr. Cranky. There isn't a minute to wait. We must get cracking at once. Do calm down, my dear, Mrs. Cranky said from the other end of the table, and stop putting marmalade on your cornflakes. Ah, to bother with my cornflakes, cried Mr. Cranky, leaping up from, I'm going to read that whole bit again. To heck with my cornflakes, cried Mr. Cranky, leaping up from his chair. Come on, George, let's get going. And the first thing we'll do is make one more saucepanful as a tester. But Dad, said little George, the trouble is, there won't be any trouble, my boy, cried Mr. Cranky. How can there possibly be any trouble? All you've got to do is put the same stuff into the saucepan as you did yesterday. And while you're doing it, I'll write down each and every item. That's how we'll make the magic recipe. Uh-oh, I bet you've spotted like me. Did George write down the instructions as he was making the medicine? No, he didn't. But Dad, George said, please listen to me. Why don't you listen to him? Oh, why don't you listen to him? Mrs. Cranky said. The boy's trying to tell you something. But Mr. Cranky was too excited to listen to anyone except himself. And then, he cried, when the new mixture is ready, we'll test it out on an old hen, just to make sure that it's absolutely sure we've got it right. And after that, we'll all shout, hooray, and build the giant factory. But Dad, come on then, what is it you want to say? I can't possibly remember all the hundreds of things I put into the saucepan to make the medicine, George said. Of course you can, my dear boy, cried Mr. Cranky. I'll help you. I'll jog your memory. You'll get it in the end. You see if you don't. Now then, what was the very first thing you put in? Well, I went to the bathroom first, George said. I used a lot of things in the bathroom and on Mummy's dressing table. Come on then, cried Mr. Killy Cranky. Up we go to the bathroom. When they got there, they found, of course, a whole lot of empty tubes and empty aerosols and empty bottles. Well, that's great, said Mr. Cranky. That tells us exactly what you used. If anything is empty, it means you used it. We don't know how much they used, did we? Because we don't know if the aerosol was that much full or that much full. So, Mr. Cranky started making a list of everything that was empty in the bathroom. And then they went to Mrs. Cranky's dressing table. A box of powder, said Mr. Cranky, writing it down. Helga's hair set, Flowers of turnip perfume. Terrific. This is going to be easy. Where did you go next? Well, to the laundry room, George said. But are you sure you haven't missed anything out? Up here, Dad. Right, I'm going to stop there. I hope you enjoyed that today. Listen out tomorrow for the next episode or next chapter of the story. Take care, everyone. Bye.